The call came on a cold Saturday morning, and the name glowing on Ethan Carter's phone made his hands freeze. It wasn't his ex-girlfriend, and it wasn't anyone he had expected to hear from again. It was her mother. The woman who had once treated him like family, who had watched him build shelves in her garage, repair her porch steps, and help around the house long before her daughter decided he was no longer part of their future. Ethan almost ignored the call, but something in his heart told him to answer. He never imagined that one simple request to repair a broken fence would become the moment that changed the direction of his entire life. Before we continue, if you believe people deserve second chances and enjoy emotional stories that stay with you long after they end, consider supporting Soulful Stories and staying with us until the end. Stories like this remind us that kindness is never truly wasted. For nearly 2 years after the breakup, Ethan had done everything he could to rebuild his life. Losing Hannah had hurt, but what hurt even more was how quickly everyone assumed he had failed because he wasn't wealthy. Hannah had accepted an exciting job in another state, met someone with money, and quietly moved on. Ethan never begged her to stay. Instead, he buried himself in work, taking every handyman job he could find. Some days he repaired roofs under the blazing sun. Other days he installed cabinets or painted old houses until his shoulders ached. Every dollar mattered because he was also caring for his aging father, whose medical bills kept growing. There were nights when Ethan skipped dinner just to make sure his father had everything he needed. When Ethan parked outside Margaret Dawson's little farmhouse, memories came rushing back. The weathered white fence surrounding the property had collapsed after a violent storm, leaving the backyard exposed. Margaret looked older than he remembered. Her hair had become completely silver, and the confident woman who used to organize neighborhood gatherings now carried herself with quiet exhaustion. She smiled warmly and thanked him for coming before gently pointing toward the damaged fence stretching nearly 50 feet across the yard. As Ethan unloaded his tools, Margaret quietly told him something that surprised him. She admitted she had called several contractors, but every estimate was far beyond what she could afford. Then she looked directly into his eyes and simply said that if he finished the job, she would make it worth his while. Ethan assumed she meant she would pay him fairly despite her financial struggles. He nodded without asking questions because helping people had always come naturally to him. The work turned out to be much harder than expected. Several wooden posts had rotted beneath the surface, meaning every section had to be dug out and replaced from the foundation. The afternoon sun became relentless. Sweat soaked through Ethan's shirt as he mixed concrete, leveled posts, and carefully measured every rail. His hands developed fresh blisters, yet he refused to rush. Every board had to line up perfectly because that was simply the way he worked. Margaret occasionally brought him iced tea and homemade sandwiches, quietly watching him with an expression that seemed filled with memories. While taking a short break beneath the shade of an old oak tree, Ethan noticed dozens of framed family photographs through the kitchen window. Many included him from happier years, Christmas dinners, birthday celebrations, and summer barbecues. Margaret had never removed those pictures. That realization struck him harder than he expected. Even after the painful breakup, she had never erased him from her family's history. As the afternoon stretched into evening, Margaret slowly began sharing things Ethan had never known. After Hannah moved away, life had not unfolded the way she expected. The glamorous relationship she had chosen eventually fell apart, leaving her isolated and disappointed. Margaret explained that she wasn't telling Ethan this to reopen old wounds. She simply wanted him to know that sometimes people spend years chasing what shines, only to realize they left behind what truly mattered. Ethan listened quietly while tightening the final boards into place. He had spent countless nights wondering whether he had somehow been unworthy. Hearing Margaret's words didn't erase the pain, but it lifted a burden he had carried alone for years. Sometimes closure doesn't arrive through apologies. Sometimes it arrives through unexpected honesty. As sunset painted the sky with soft shades of orange and pink, the fence finally stood stronger than it had before the storm. Every post was perfectly aligned, every panel secure enough to withstand years of harsh weather. Margaret slowly walked the entire length of the fence, gently running her hand across the smooth wood. Tears quietly filled her eyes. She wasn't crying because of the fence. She was mourning everything that had been broken long before the storm had ever arrived. Ethan packed away his tools, expecting Margaret to hand him an envelope with payment. Instead, she invited him inside for one last cup of coffee. The little farmhouse still smelled of cinnamon and fresh bread. Nothing inside had changed except the silence. Margaret disappeared into another room before returning with a small wooden box that looked decades old. She placed it gently on the kitchen table and smiled. Inside the box were old savings bonds, a handwritten letter, and the keys to a small workshop sitting behind the farmhouse. Margaret explained that her late husband had always admired Ethan's work ethic. Before passing away, he often said that if anyone deserved the workshop one day, it was Ethan because he built things with his heart instead of simply using his hands. She admitted she had delayed making that decision because she didn't know whether Ethan would ever return. The broken fence had simply given her a reason to call. Ethan stared at the keys in disbelief. The workshop wasn't enormous, but it contained professional woodworking equipment worth far more than he could ever afford. Margaret softly reminded him of the promise she had made earlier that morning. She had told him she would make it worth his while. She hadn't been talking about money. She had been talking about giving someone deserving a chance to build a better future. Over the following months, Ethan transformed the dusty workshop into a thriving custom furniture business. Using the equipment Margaret had trusted him with, he crafted dining tables, bookshelves, rocking chairs, and handcrafted cabinets that quickly earned a reputation throughout the county. Customers didn't just buy furniture. They bought pieces built with patience, honesty, and care. Before long, Ethan hired 2 young apprentices who had struggled to find work, giving them opportunities just as someone had once given him. Margaret became like family once again, proudly watching the workshop fill with life and laughter. She often sat on the porch with a warm cup of tea while listening to the sounds of saws and hammers echo across the property. Ethan visited every weekend, fixing little things around the house without ever accepting payment. Their bond had survived heartbreak, disappointment, and years of silence because genuine kindness leaves roots that time cannot destroy. One afternoon, Ethan unexpectedly crossed paths with Hannah during a local charity event. She looked surprised to see him standing beside one of the handcrafted tables displayed for auction. She congratulated him on his success and quietly admitted she had underestimated the kind of man he truly was. Ethan smiled with sincere peace in his heart. There was no bitterness left to carry. Some chapters are not meant to be rewritten. They simply prepare us for the story that was always waiting ahead. If this story has touched your heart and reminded you that kindness is never wasted, we'd love to know what you think. Special request, comment below with one person who gave you a second chance, or someone you wish you could thank today. The greatest rewards in life rarely arrive as money. Sometimes they arrive disguised as an unexpected phone call, an old fence waiting to be repaired, or a person who quietly remembers the goodness everyone else forgot. Ethan believed he was simply fixing broken wood, but in reality, he was rebuilding hope, restoring trust, and opening the door to a future far greater than anything he had imagined. And perhaps the most beautiful lesson of all is that when we choose kindness without expecting anything in return, life often finds extraordinary ways to make it worth our while.